Hey Guy, how are you?
Fantastic. Thank you, Adnan. It's a pleasure to see you again after all these years. Um, and it would have been good to see you in the States, but here we are over video link. It's just as good.
Yeah, it's been a while. I don't even know how long it's been since I've seen you the last time, but whichever way, it's always good to connect.
Yeah, I think it must be, well, it was certainly a couple of years before we had the COVID problem. So probably
Right.
around 2000 sort of 17, 18. So it's been a couple
Oh,
of years,
right.
definitely.
Yeah, it's been a while. Well, I'm glad we're able to connect this way. I know there's a time difference. Usually, I get a chance to do these interviews later, but I'll be more than happy to start this one earlier, especially since there's 6 hours difference.
There's 6 hours difference between Central Time in the States. So,
All right, good deal.
this is late afternoon for me now. So.
Right, right. All right. Well, so I figured you have a wide variety of books, covering a wide variety of subjects. So I figured let's start out with you and how you first got into this to start writing and all your experiences, and then figured we'll go into some subjects after that.
Well, interestingly enough, I mean, the writing was almost a side project from the work I was doing from healing, because although a long time before I started to write, I was starting to I got back involved with spiritualism. I'll tell you the story very, very briefly, but
Sure.
like everybody else, I was interested in spirituality and metaphysics when I was very young, and I started to do lots of meditation most nights and most mornings, and I was getting really in contact with the greater reality. And then one morning, I had a very profound visitation from four entities that appeared to me to be very similar form factor to me, human shape, what appeared to be white robes, and they told me that I was part of them or one of them, and that what I was doing was right, and what I was researching into was right, and what I was practicing was right, what I believed in and understood was right, but it wasn't really the right time to start doing it. That I needed to experience more basic earthly existence, earthly experiences. And so from that point onwards, my sort of focus on meditation and spiritism I took a bit of a back seat, really. Although I was interested still, I didn't go into it in the same level of dedication and devotion and single-mindedness. So I ended up doing what everybody else did. Became very interested in my career. Met a wonderful lady who was also spiritual, but we had similar thought processes, and in effect, just started to do the average person's thing. Try to get a better house, try to get a better job, try to get more money to be able to decorate the house, because when you buy a house, you're usually short of money. So we did everything we did, which was part of what we do, as we're immersed in our incarnation. So that carried on until really the sort of late 90s. In fact, probably slightly before then, middle 90s, because I was starting to do an MBA, Master of Business Administration, and one of the students there said that she was interested in Reiki, and was I interested in it? We talked a little bit about spiritual things, and I said not really. I didn't really feel attracted to me. It didn't feel like it was the right level, even though I wasn't particularly interested in anything much spiritual by then. At least not in the context of wanting to go out and do a course. But eventually, she persuaded me to go on this course, and within a year, I was a Reiki master, and that sort of rekindled the experience and the interest. And so from there onwards, I was getting more and more interested. At the same time I was doing this MBA, I was starting to get a bit stressed out with it, because there was lots of different things involved, and some mathematics and everything else. And so I needed to go to a homeopathic to help me find a homeopathic that would help me think straight, cure things like anxiety, concern, where I couldn't do what I was doing. And this person eventually ended up being a healer that had been taught by Barbara Brennan. So the gentleman who was giving me homeopathics to help me sort of calm down and reduce the anxiety and let me see things in a straight and clear way. Basically, he left and introduced me to another healer, another energy healer, who was also in the same class with Barbara Brennan as he was. So I continued with her. And after about 6 months or so of being with her, her name was Helen, she said, well, I'm going to basically teach energy healing exactly the same as I was taught by Barbara. And are you interested? We've got a few people who also might be interested. We can do a class. So I said, well, okay, I'll go, because it was only a suck it and see lesson, really. So I went for the first one, and then I signed up for 6 weeks, 6 months basically, for that first part. And then after that, I signed up for the rest of the course. So 4 years later, I popped out the other side with a qualification basically that was exactly the same as what she got, and I was taught all the healing modalities that were attributable to the Brennan healing science. But within that, I was taught how to move up and down the frequencies by opening the chakras, and that was to allow us to affect different healings on the different on the chakras themselves, or the energy templates that create the human form. But whilst doing this, we used to share healings with the other students, and some of the students were complaining that they were experiencing weird things with me that they weren't experiencing with anybody else. And so they complained that they were frightened by some of the image because it was totally otherworldly. And so my teachers told me to sort of try to control where I was, because I wasn't staying within the 7 frequencies associated with the chakras. Anyway, I resolved to do my best, but I also resolved to find out where I was going and how to control it, and see if I could go to these different places in a more robust and repeatable way. So I developed a process to be able to do that. And eventually I was able to move up and down the frequencies quite easily, and understand where I was going to, communicate with other entities, go back to communicate with those entities, and sort of restart existing conversations. Well, again, in parallel, another friend of mine worked in Sweden, and he had another friend who was also a Reiki master. And she told him that a friend of his, who was a Reiki master, which was me, had to come to see him because something important was going to happen. Well, what I didn't realize was we'd already organized a short holiday with him. And on one of the days we were with him, we went for a walk, and he lived in a place called Trollhättan, which is not too far from Gothenburg in Sweden. And there's a wonderful sort of countryside walk along the river that went from where he lived through an old museum, which was an old sort of railway museum, down through a pine forest to this pathway, and up towards the main town of Trollhättan. Whereas as we went down, my hands started to tingle, my body started to tingle, and everything was tingling, and I got this impression that I needed to sit down and meditate. And as I was starting to think this, I saw this like rock that was in the river, and it was like a very, very small island, so it was surrounded by water. So I jumped on this rock. It was only about 2 or 3 feet from the pathway, and I said, I need to meditate here. And so my wife at the time, my late wife Anne, who is the subject of the Anne dialogues, by the way, we can talk about that later if you want to, and my friends, they went off walking up this path, and they said, "Well, wait on this pedestrian suspension bridge, the bridge that went over the river." So they waited for me there. Well, in the meantime, I meditated, and I received what I could only describe as being the most profound download I've ever had in my life. I've never had anything since it, to be fair. And I sort of came out of the meditation, and I was just totally stunned. I couldn't put 2 or 3 words together to make a sentence. And so my friend and my late wife, they came down to see me because they could see I wasn't going to go to see them. And they said that when I was sitting on that rock, they felt that there was objects or craft hovering over me, and that they were rewiring me for something I was supposed to be doing in the future. Well, whilst they described that, I looked over towards the other side of the river, and I saw something sort of hid, was there but wasn't there. And what I noticed was, although it was a dead calm day, there was no wind, and it was the river was like a mill pond. A certain area was really, really choppy, like there was lots of wind there, and the trees were going backwards and forwards, like they were reacting to the downwash of a helicopter's rotor blades. So as I looked towards this area and I tried harder and harder to see what was there, I started to see an image come out. I was obviously tuning into what was there, and I saw these couple of objects which looked like they were a mixture of mechanical and biological functionality. They looked like they were basically objects or craft of some sort that were a mixture of being mechanical but also biological. And as I strained more and more and looked harder and harder, I felt a real pressure and a pain around the area of my third eye. And then I had this real big booming voice in my head saying, "Stop what you're doing. You'll undo what we've just done to you. You can't use it that in the way that you're using this ability this fast and in this sort of level of detail. You need to sort of let it wash over you. Need it to let it absorb within you." So I was a bit surprised at this, and that sort of shook me out of being in focus, and then it all disappeared. And it was then that my friend and my late wife described this, what they picked up and what they'd seen about this rewiring that was happening. Well, as soon as that finished, that happened, I started to become more and more capable of going further and further up the frequencies, and the healings were becoming more and more profound as well. And I got to the point where I could actually move up the frequencies at will, much faster. It used to take me half an hour to get to a point where I could go to a different level and then spend 10 minutes there and then spend half an hour coming back down the frequencies. And then I'd have to go to work, because I used to do this in the morning. But I noticed I was getting in contact with different entities that were, in effect, at different levels of frequency. And I managed to communicate with them and get lots of different information from them. So I started to write this down and sort of categorize it. And I'd finished. I didn't pay too much attention to it. I just kept doing it. I noticed that I got total recall of what I was experiencing in the different meditations, and didn't think much of that either. I'd meditation in the morning. I'd go to work. At lunchtime, I'd use the computer and type it all up, so I didn't forget it. It was all written down, and then eventually, I just had lots and lots of information there. Almost at the same time of finishing the healing course, I tried to open a little healing studio in a holistic healing venue where there was lots of other different healings there. There was massage, there was acupuncture, acupressure, Reiki, and other things as well. But my practice never really took off. So although I was there 6 months, I only really got a couple, perhaps even one or two clients. It's not the case today. I'm overwhelmed with clients these days. But in those days, I was quite surprised. I'd done all this work on the healing and that nothing was happening. So I started to focus on the writing. And I eventually realized that the information I was accruing and was starting to categorize into different subject headings was unique and wasn't in any of the spiritual metaphysical texts I've read in the past. So I then decided to put it all together and create a book out of it, which was called The History of God. And I sent it to 6 other publishing houses and didn't hear anything at all. And I sent it again to Ozark Mountain Publishing and didn't hear for a long, long time. So I wrote that off. And then New Year's Eve, 2009, I had an email come through from Ozark saying that they were interested in publishing the book. And it was Julia Cannon. And was I interested in entering a contract? And from then onwards, I was invited to go to the Transformation Conference and do a talk, as all the other new authors were. And I carried on with the information. I started to get more and more information. That created the second book, Beyond the Source 1. And then that created the springboard for the third book, Beyond the Source Book 2. And whilst this was going on, I was doing a blog on my website, and I was drawn towards the idea of creating different ways in which people could avoid karma. And then it came to me in a meditation that maybe the blogs I was doing was good enough to put into a small book that would that would be something that people could relate to and pick up and take, some of the ways of avoiding karma into their daily life and become, better, more spiritual individuals. So the books started to come, and the information carried on coming. So after the Avoiding Karma book, I wrote The Origin Speaks, because I started to realize very early on that although I was in contact with different entities, and one of those was an aspect of the entity that we would call God, but I call the source entity, it was also part of something much bigger that I later found out like to refer to itself as the origin. But that I also found out through another old book that I just simply opened the pages of at random, by a chap called Yogi Ramachara. He was around about 120 years ago in Chicago and wrote these series of books on different Western, Eastern Oriental occultism, that the Hindus classified the origin as being the absolute, all that there is, that which is beyond God. So at that point, I realized that my information wasn't particularly new. It was coming from a different location, or a different person, me, and that the information was more up to speed in terms of a more scientific and modern understanding. And I was getting it independently of these other texts that were out there. So I was really surprised and pleased that I found out that there was not just new information coming out, but there was validity, because the information correlated with much older text as well. And so I started to realize then that this information is there for everybody, but we get different levels of detail depending upon our own expansiveness. And while this was happening, my wife had passed on. She had a brain tumor for 9 years, and she finally passed on Christmas Eve in 2012, very close to the end of the Mayan calendar, interestingly enough. And I'd started to get back in contact with her, and the result of those dialogues created a book called The End Dialogues. But it was also interesting because she described the incarnation process in a greater level of depth than I've ever known about, and from what I could understand, it was greater than anybody else had written about. Although the subject headings that we used were the same, the level of detail was completely different, and the knowledge base was also using terminology that I'd gained from the other books as well. After I finished that, I started to work on more dialogue with the source, and it told me to describe the different entities that work with it, but whilst also being within it, to maintain the structure, the multiversal environment that we exist within and evolve through as well. So that created a book that was describing all those different roles and what they did. And whilst again all this is happening, I'm also getting lots and lots of one-to-one consultations, which include lots of healing over the years. And so I started to develop other healing techniques other than those I was given by Barbara. Well, not through Barbara directly, but through Barbara's students, Helen. And because the source was giving me ways of healing people who needed different healing modalities, so I got the intuition to write down everything I knew. And that became the book Psycho Spiritual Healing, which is the latest book to be published. Although I've just finished another book called The Uncreated Creations, which is about a group of entities which are extremely rare, and there's not many of them, not only within the source, but in the other levels of structure that is the origin as well. And I'm currently working on another book which is called Beyond the Origin, which is basically more about the origin, and therefore beyond our current knowledge of the origin. And that's it. Oh, There's one more as well, but I'll come back to that later.
Well, I mean, go ahead if you want to cover that now, and then we'll get into some conversation.
Yeah, well, basically, it's over the years, I was persuaded to do an online meeting called what I called World Satsanga, which is basically I would do a lecture, then people would give me questions, and I would answer them live. Later, it became pre-recorded, and now it's gone back to being live again. And I would do a meditation at the end. And one of the people who ended up being one of my Traversing the Frequency students, because I created a course to teach people what I do and how I project my consciousness into these different multiversal environments, she was transcribing them. And what we've decided to do when we hit the 10-year mark was to edit them down to being similar subject headings and subject matters. And she's doing it actually most of the work in conjunction with asking me questions about how we should sometimes massage the information. And we're going to create the lectures side and the questions and answers side. So that may end up being what would be basically possibly one, possibly two more books. We'll see. So it's all coming everywhere, and there's people coming forward to translate the books into Chinese and Japanese and Spanish and Czech and Slovenian, and Arabic. It's just amazing what's happening now. I mean, I couldn't have predicted it, 15 years ago. Yeah.
Right. Well, guy, that's very exciting. So, as you were talking about, about information, and that some of the information or a lot of information is not new, but has been written about before. It makes me think about the saying that everybody always says, history repeats itself, or they always talk about, well, we're in this, in this classroom, called Earth, and being alive. And it makes me think about how we go about doing schooling, that at the end of the day, once one group graduates, the same books get handed down to them, and so they go over the same lessons, same things, repeating it over and over again. So in a way, then, makes me think that history repeating itself is not always a bad thing, because if you have new people, new minds that don't know this, they have to kind of go through the same lessons, same problems that the previous generation has. But anyway, that was just a side thought as you were talking about the book that you found.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that as we find out that it's not new knowledge, it's old knowledge, but we're picking it up and giving it more depth and detail, because actually we're only able to understand that which we've got the capability of, or the expansiveness to be able to work with and understand. So when these texts were written 100 years ago, 120 years ago, and beyond and before, the information was given to us in a way that we could work with, because we hadn't got the same level of education. We hadn't got the same cultural information. We hadn't got the same level of technological understanding. We hadn't got the same level of expansiveness. So when we start to understand that we're getting information which is corroborated with older texts, we're not just sitting at that level, we're actually going higher as well, because we're starting at a point, okay, this is understandable now. Now I understand that my information is real. It's not come from me reading a book and then regurgitating it because it's been stuck in my subconscious somewhere. It's completely new and unique information to me. And and there's more information than that which is the old information from previous authors or previous yogis or previous teachers. So it's always progressive. And I can, well, I hope and I would like that those people who study the information in my books, they will be able to understand that and go even further, because we always stand on the shoulders of giants. And Dolores Cannon, opened a huge door, really. I mean, she opened the minds and hearts of lots and lots of people by showing them that the information is still there within us. It's just that we can't access it because our communicative bandwidth is reduced as a function of coming down into the lower frequencies where we need to incarnate to experience the environment supported by those lower frequencies. And so accessing that information through her hypnosis and also creating a healing modality, which is obviously QHHT, exposed a lot of this new wave of information with a different level of understanding, because we've got a different level of education. And so the opportunity for people to therefore take Dolores' information and then move on to mine, or go in, or have mine and hers in parallel, or vice versa, is wonderful, because then the educational base, the start point gets lifted higher. So when somebody else comes along with more comprehensive information that's more expansive, then they're able to understand it faster and more easier, because they have, in effect, had a higher start point. Yeah, they're not starting at caveman level. They're starting at a high level of education, technology, science, and expansiveness as well.
Right, good deal. So I wanted to actually get into some of the, I'm pretty sure people watching would be interested about these specific interactions, because everyone always just wants to, cut through the, like, what was said, what was happening. But before that, you were talking about kind of being able to go through these different levels. And are these sensations that you feel along with visuals, or is it just one or the other? Or how does that change in these different, I guess, what did you call it again? Would you call them dimensions, or would it just be different frequency level?
Basically, we exist in a multiversal environment, which is a function of the structure of our creator, which religious texts calls God, but I'm drawn towards and call the source entity. And in effect, this multiversal environment has lots of different universes involved with it as a function of its structure. And the structure is broken down into frequency levels, subdimensional components, and full dimensions. And each of these frequency levels, within 11 of those full dimensions, has the capability of and does support a self-contained, simultaneously manifest universal environment in its own right. So if we have 12 full dimensions, which is what we've got in this particular part of the structure that we're allowed to use to evolve through, they all function in the same way. So they have 3 subdimensional components, and each of those subdimensional components further split out into 12 frequency levels or frequency bands, which are and do support a universal environment. So we have 11 times 3 times 12, which is 396 frequency levels or frequency bands, and therefore 396 universes. But where we are now is in the lowest frequencies, and that's supported by a full dimension in its own right. And that full dimension is unique because it houses all the lowest frequencies, and so it behaves slightly differently to the others. So although it splits out into 3 subdimensional components, it collapses back into a composite subdimensional component, which only allows 12 frequencies to be created. And those 12 frequencies are all required, not just in 1 or 2, but 2 frequencies, but all together to allow enough, shall we call it, finitude or environmental space, volume, to be able to house a universal environment. So we have a rather unique situation where we have a single universe that occupies as the only universe within a single full dimension. That full dimension's only got a composite subdimensional component, and it's only got 12 frequencies. And that universe is unique because it needs all those 12 frequencies to create it. So although we have, very quick maths, 396 frequencies plus 12, which is 408 frequencies, we only have one extra universe, which makes 397 universes. And so it's this is the physical universe, as I call it, is really unique because it's the only universe where we would have to enter into some form of collaboration with the environment to be able to interact with it in the way it's supposed to be interacted with. And this collaboration from the lower frequency perspective is having to occupy a vehicle. In this instance, it's the human body. to be able to interact with the environment in the way it's supposed to be interacted with, so that we can start to experience, learn, and evolve. And by the way, being here is hard, really hard work, because we lose most of our communicative bandwidth because we're dropping down the frequencies. And as a result of that, we evolve much faster because it is difficult. So the multiverse is a very large structure. There are also parallel versions of the universe, because the universes, because we have the capability of free will, and various different forms of collective will. We're in different locations within the physical universe, and so as we make decisions, we create the possibility of having a number of different fractalized versions of us. So there can be thousands upon thousands, or even millions of different universes within the multiverse, and they can even be different multiverses as well, as a function of our collective decision-making processes. So we exist in a multiversal environment, and a dimension is something completely different to what scientists think of as being a dimension. Although some of the theoretical physicists are starting to understand. That's I'm grateful for their open-mindedness, because saying that we're in a third dimension is nonsense, because we exist in three frequencies, not three dimensions. I mean, three dimensions are basically there to use as a metric for volume, height, width, and depth. And so we have to consider that we live in a completely different environmental condition, and understand that. When we understand that, then we'll start to see metaphysics being the precursor for physics.
So then how does that, so the process as you're talking about when you were meditating and going through these different frequencies, how does that is it a feeling, is it tingling through the body, or is it a visual? Can you please go a little bit more detailed than that?
When we start to work on ourselves, we start to be able to contact and get feedback, and that feedback can be things like tingling, can be temperature, can be tinnitus, can be pressure around the third eye area, or it can be clairsentience, which is knowingness. It can be clairvoyance, which is seeing with our mind's eye, or it can be clairaudience, which is hearing with our mind's ear. And I noticed that I was getting all of the above. Some people get one thing, some people get two things or three things when they're doing the work. When I teach them to do this, they tend to have a start point that they are, and they work with that. And I encourage them to work with that and rely on it, because as they rely on it, they trust it, they actually become more expansive and therefore higher frequency, and then the other functions start to drop into place. But I experience things on an intuitive level, on a knowingless level, on a conceptual level, on a level of knowingness, a level of seeing things, a level of hearing things. I'll get the whole gamut of different forms and functions of connectivity.
But when you finally made the shift, without a doubt, okay, I'm somewhere else and I'm not exactly in the reality I was there previously.
So I pick things up, I see things, and sometimes I have to understand them. Sometimes I know them, but I can't put them into English words. That makes any sense?
Yeah.
So I have to sort of think, well, how can I explain this? And in effect, I then sometimes get an example of how I can translate it, how I can use a human example to be able to explain the concepts, and that's how I get the information and broadcast it in the books.
So then the other question then, when you finally then make that shift, do these different beings that you've interacted with and that have given you information, do they just kind of appear, or they're already there, or how does that happen before they convey what they convey to you? And then maybe go into some of the information that you would like to share about what kind of conversations you've had.
So when I originally started, I started to connect with entities that were fairly close to me frequently, and go straight back to them and get the information. They would give me concepts, they would give me understanding. I would ask them questions about certain things, and they would give me answers. And so in effect, what I was doing was creating a dialogue based upon me asking a few questions, them giving me information, me asking questions on the information, me asking more questions on that information, and getting more answers back. And so I started to create a questions and answer routine with some of these entities. And then I found out that I could go directly to the top entity in this instance, which was the source entity, and that gave me a different level of understanding, basically, because I was seeing things from its perspective, a much higher level viewpoint on existence as well, but also humanized as well, so that I could understand it in this particular environment that I'm currently in. And that was the same for the origin. So it ended up being like a dialogue. I would have intuition about a subject that I need, I still do. I have an intuition about a subject that I need to communicate with, and rather than have to go up the frequencies one by one, I can just go there now. It's purely instantaneous. I just go to wherever I need to. And I found out that although the multiverse is structured, that actually that's just a concept for human beings to understand. It's completely formless. And then it's pure finitude. And that I can connect just by focusing on being connected. I'm just there now. So the questions and answers come about purely about concepts that we don't know about yet, or expansion and progression of the knowledge of certain concepts that I've previously discussed. And the whole idea is to get information about different concepts, about what is the greater reality that is more than I've currently had or previously had, or that anybody else has had. So I'm started to, I just really just receive the intuitive thought process that I need to ask this question. And sometimes when I'm starting a book, I sit down, and all of a sudden I get like a download of information. I have to write that's a chapter heading, that's a chapter heading, that's a chapter heading, that's a chapter heading. And all the different chapter headings end up being different levels of detail that I need to understand, different directions I need to go into. So I then start by broadcasting my desire to ask a question based upon a particular subject matter that I've intuitively written down as being a chapter for a book. And then I wait, basically, and then the dialogue starts. And every time I start writing the text, I sometimes have to reread what's happened before, because it's not from me. It's given to me. The information is given to me, so I don't remember what's there. I sometimes remember where I finished, but I need to sort of understand where I've got to then to rekindle the direction of the questioning and answering. And so I get things. The answers come into all sorts of different ways. I get them like clairaudiently, so I hear them, or I just know them, or I see them. Or I get lots of images and visualizations, and lots of talking, spiritual talking, or talking clairaudiently, and sometimes I just get knowingness. I don't notice the body tingling these days, although it does when I work with some of my students and we start to do things from the basics again. But it's really a case of I can communicate now without knowing where I am in terms of the location, because the location is everywhere. What I've tried to understand is that space is space. That if we think about existing in a sphere, we don't. We exist in formlessness. But if we existed in a sphere, but I don't need to go there or there or there or there, or in a different frequency that has the similar location. Everything just is in the same space. Everything exists, and the differential between location and structure is basically a function of focus of my sentience, or of an entity's sentience. And I just go through this question and answer session, and sometimes I don't even know which way I'm going to go. It just the questions just start. So I get a connection with source, or the origin. In this instance, with a new book, the work I'm working on now is the origin, and it just goes in a different direction, and then it comes back and it goes to a different direction, and it goes to the next subject, and then it goes back to the first subject. So it can be completely random, but the information is always progressive, and progresses from the previous set of information, either in this book or a previous book, and it's just amazing. It's other than getting the subject headings and sometimes the subheadings in between for the different levels of information I'm getting, that I've got no idea where I'm going to, which is beautiful.
So, have they always only given you information about um, how each individual, how to kind of tune into things and improve things about themselves, or were there also some prophetic messages?
Uh, in reality, there are bits and pieces about how we should think, behave, and act, and right now, the vast majority of the population of the Earth are thinking, behaving, and acting in a completely unresponsible way, to be honest. And those who are more of service to others do think in the right way. But it's and so there's information based upon that, and that does come out. But it's more about giving people a more complete picture about the environment that we exist in, who we really are, and where we come from, and the concepts surrounding the environments that we do exist within, and we can move around in. So it's more about the understanding the metaphysics behind the metaphysics, if that makes any sense. It's
Mhm.
about it's more, and sometimes sometimes it's about science. Sometimes it's about, I mean, in the book I've just finished, that's still that's still to be published. One of the concepts that was in there was about understanding quantum teleportation and what quantum computing should really be.
And that's the psycho spiritual healing.
And psycho spiritual healing was really about.
No, I mean what you just said. The computer here, was that in that book or a different one?
Oh, that's this information about the about quantum teleportation or quantum
Mhm.
computing is in the book called the which hasn't been published yet.
Ah, okay.
Um, and that information is yet to go onto the shelves for the readers to read. But the information there was amazing. When I was talking to one of the entities, they were saying that basically what with this idea of quantum teleportation, all it is copying. It's not actually teleportation; it's copying, and that we need to understand that everything in the multiverse, everything has the capability of being everything else. And they call that quantum latency. So if you think of it as, if you sort of zoom into the physical universe, but and then everything in the physical universe comes down to a quantum level that is well below the leptons, which are the quarks, that come right down to the nu, which is the very basic building block of gross physicality. That everything there can have the capability of being everything else. So, for instance, this shirt could be a motor car, it could be a starship, it could be a galaxy. It's got the capability of being everything, not just one thing or two things, but everything that exists is within it. All we have to do is change the focus of it, and it would change into being the moon or a sun or a nebulae or an ant. It could be because everything is everything else, but there's a focus on what it is at this particular point in our existence. And that was an amazing thought process, and it was well beyond, I believe, although it's not beyond the capability of theoretical physicists to understand. And when we understand that everything can be everything else, not that it's entangled, it's not entangled, it's beyond entanglement. it is everything else, then all we have to change is our focus or our intention of what that focus is. Then we start to understand that we can change everything, and we don't need to be constrained by location or even thought process. And that was one of the things that came out of the book on the Om, which isn't published right now, but is the book I've just finished. And that was an amazing dialogue. And when I read the text, I'll stand back and think, wow, even now.
And so when there was something interesting you said. So is it basically from teleportation from our point of view that we would be a copy, or they're saying that that's how it would work if and when we eventually have it?
Well, they've done quantum teleportation, as they call it, but basically all they've done is just use the theory of entanglement and to say that because everything is entangled, everything is everything else. They're just saying that there is now there, but it's there concurrently. That's no longer there, and therefore it's there. It's there and there at the same time. So that's why it's copying and not teleportation. So they need to think about this and understand that you can create the possibility of things existing in different locations, but unless you detach them from the focus of what they were to what they should be, then you're always going to get the copy, because the entanglement says that everything has the potential to be something else, not that it is everything else.
So then, in a sense, this is again a focus on a spiritual understanding than to have a hardware device that makes that possible. Meaning, for you to, if there's already a different version of me already existing somewhere else, I can then focus on that and become that and experience what it's experiencing right now instead of needing some kind of hardware, right?
It's about focus. It's not about having a machine that does it for us, like a massive accelerometer, or a large hadron collider or something else. It's about moving beyond the need for mechanics to do the work for us. It's about the ability. It's about us realizing that if we can raise our frequencies, then we start to be able to access other functions. And part of those other functions is the inherent understanding of what our environment is, how we interact with that environment, and how we can manipulate that environment. And that only comes through working on ourselves and distancing ourselves from that which has been our programming in this particular incarnation. Because when we're born, from the moment we're associated, our soul is associated with the body, we're starting to be reprogrammed. We come into a low frequency environment where for example, the bandwidth or the baud rate is so significantly lower than what we normally exist within and are able to communicate with, that we just can't communicate with what we really are. So it's like us communicating with a supercomputer that can access and understand everything on the internet concurrently, but by using two baked bean cans with a piece of string between the two of them. It's just the difference is so different that we just can't function. So that's why we forget who and what we are, because we start to become associated with the body, and we start to become pre-programmed by prenatal and postnatal thoughts, behaviors and actions of our parents, of our siblings, of our friends, of our educators, of our work colleagues, of the environment in general. So we start to forget that we are omnipotent in entities, and we start to become limited within the environment that we're in. Once we move beyond that, we won't need things like computers to communicate with each other. We won't need things like cars to move around. We won't need airplanes. We'll just do it by instantaneous thought. Or using it,
So just to then circle back to then the end dialogues in reincarnation, so would that be then? Is that kind of a similar process that goes on when when we're done with a certain body, time, and whatever we wanted to do, that it would be simply of a refocusing of the consciousness to something else? Or is there, as we always know it, as an in-between period? I believe like what we call heaven or something before we then reborn. How would that process go, if you could please get into that?
Well, it's a complicated process in terms of how the soul associates with the body. But in essence, it's the soul, or what I call the aspect, which is a smaller aspect of a much larger volume of sentience and energy that's associated with that sentience, is a smaller unit of sentience that's projected down from it, and then associates itself with the gross physical body, which is not just what we see here. There's a whole different level of structure associated with it that allows the gross physical to manifest. And in doing so, we sort of enter into this environment and we start to lose contact and with who and what we are. But when we return back to the normal environment, we return into a situation which could be in total communion, which means we become one again with that which projected the small aspect of itself into this different environment. We become one with our higher self, if you want to call it that. The Hindus call it the Godhead. I think Dolores called it the Oversoul. Sometimes we call it the higher self. So we either into full communion, so we go back into oneness with it, or we can stay in certain different levels of individuality, which can also be different functions of individuality within communion, or we can still stay projected outside of it. And so if we stay in some level of individuality, we start to review what we've experienced and how other entities that have helped us be here, what we call our guide and our helpers, have done to help us and be in service to us. Because not every entity is in the evolutionary cycle. There are other entities that are helping those that are in the evolutionary cycle, and they evolve as a function of us evolving. So we start to understand how much we've experienced by being here, how much we've evolved, how well the communicative process between those entities that are helping us be here and nudging us to get down the right paths and not get distracted have helped us. And we start to review that, and that's called the end of life review, basically. And we also look at how we can potentially experience more in another incarnation, should we decide to do so. And most of us do. Most of us come back for thousands of incarnations to be able to experience, learn, and evolve in a faster way by entering into an environment which is appallingly difficult to interact with. And so we work on understanding what the evolutionary opportunities are for us, how we can achieve those evolutionary opportunities, what environment will give us that evolutionary opportunity, and the circumstances with those environments, and the entities that are within those environments in those circumstances, how the interaction with them would also support it, and how we can support others doing the same thing as well. So it's a very complicated series of interactions we have to be able to plan what we sometimes call the life, the life plan is, and therefore the expression of expansion in terms of experience we get, and the subsequent evolution progression we get from those experiences. And so, and of course, on top of this, we've got free will. And how does free will enter into our plans, our life plan? Because people think that if we've got a life plan, we don't have free will. Well, we do. The life plan is just a series of goals. How we achieve those goals is our free will. For instance, if we wanted to travel from, let's say, New York to San Francisco, that's the goal. That's the life plan. How we achieve that traveling from New York to San Francisco is up to us. We can fly there, we can walk there, we can travel on a bus there, we can go on a train there, we can hitchhike there, we can go on a push bike there, a motor car, or a motorbike there, or we can choose to stop off at different places, or we can live in certain places, or we can not get there at all. That is part of the free will, but that creates a depth of experience. on the journey of getting to the point of supporting the success of achieving the goal associated with part of our life plan. And so there's all these other things going on in the background. But in essence, we are sentience and energy, which is striving to evolve. And as we evolve as smaller individualized units of that larger volume of sentience and energy, that sentience and energy also evolves. And as that evolves, so does source, which is also basically what we were created from, because we are all individualized units of sentience from source, or from God, if you want to call it that. So the processes that we go through and the concepts that were understood as part of the AND dialogues create a deeper understanding as to, how we incarnate, the mechanics of incarnation, the mechanics of leaving the incarnation, and what happens in between.
So this is a bit kind of going backwards, but I'm pretty sure it's something I meant to ask you about earlier, but I guess better late than never. So that was so interesting when you said there's God and then there's the origin. Can you please go a little bit into that? So then that the God, as we understand it, is not the be all be all, that there's something higher than it.
Well, my understanding was that originally there was nothing. There was just space, if you want to call it that. But that there was a level of sort of Darwinian evolution that happened in the different energies that were there, in the different levels of structure. Well, I use the word structure because that humans can understand structure, that started to naturally gravitate towards itself and clump together. And then eventually this happened in various different locations, and these volumes of energy started to actively seek each other out and get bigger and bigger, which created levels of intelligence, which created levels of self-awareness, which created levels of consciousness, which created levels of creativity, which created sentience. And that's seen or illustrated in the Road to Sentience in The Origin Speaks. And that created a...
Sorry, just I apologize. Just I have this thought. I have to get it out. So if there's what I, as you were saying that, I was imagining, okay, there's this space. If there's no specific directions, how do you seek something? Because, usually we always need a platform to kind of go out there and okay, well, I'm going to go walk north and I'll see what I find, or I'm going to go south or whatever. But in a omnidirectional space, how did that occur, that this seeking out?
In effect, there must be a level of attraction that happens between energies of similar or same type. And so it's a bit like sand attracts sand, tin attracts tin. It's like there's almost like a gravitational force where the same energy would gravitate towards the same energy. The frequency would be the same frequency, for instance. So as energy gains some level of intelligence, that creates a signature. And that signature is what also creates a greater attractive force. And that signature grows as the energy grows in size and intelligence, and eventually it starts to become sentient. It starts to know what it is and seek out other aspects that could add to it, or could allow it to become a bigger level of sentience. So that's a function of evolution. So it's a case of really basic gravitation at first, but then as the energies gravitate together, the clump together, then it becomes it's very simple intelligence, very minor intelligence, more intelligence, active intelligence, and it starts to grow and snowball that way. So we can't think of it in terms of, it actively seeks itself out at first. It's just by luck. The energy bumps into similar energy and just sticks to itself, and then then it wanders around, probably from a human perspective, billions of years, then bumps into another clump of energy which is similar to itself, and then it starts to create a condition where it gravitates naturally to other areas of similar or same energies. And then as it grows, it starts to create a desire to bump into different clumps of energy of similar or same type. And it starts to grow from there. So it's like a natural, that's a natural evolution. And that creates a being in essence. But when a being gets to a large size like the origin, and the origin started to understand what it wanted to be and started to want to grow. Once those energies became sentient, and the sentience starts to realize that actually the energies that gave birth to it are no longer necessary, the sentience can move away from that original energy and occupy other energies. And sometimes these energies are susceptible to change. They create the condition for sentience to be created within them, and sentience can hunt down these other potential energies that could allow it to grow. And of course, as it grew, it started to realize that its actual growth was slow. So it decided to try to create other versions of itself and give them the opportunity to grow and assist it in its growth, and also they can grow at the same time. But it didn't understand how big it was or what it was. So how can it recreate itself? So that idea failed, basically. So then it created smaller aspects of its individual sentience. It individualized parts of its own sentience into 12 smaller aspects that eventually became the source entities, and one of them is our source entity, our creator, and gave its purpose. That purpose was to experience, learn, and evolve in any way to allow it to create an evolutionary condition within itself that would allow it to grow. And as it grew, the origin grew. But these individualized units of sentience were within the origin. So it's like us creating atoms, for example, and give these atoms the opportunity to evolve. And as they evolve, the bigger body itself evolves. So our creator, our source, is basically, from our perspective, is unbelievably huge. But it itself has divided itself into two. Part of it is structure, the multiverse, and billions and trillions of smaller individualized units of sentience, our higher selves or true energetic selves, God's head, oversoul, it all means the same thing, and given them the opportunity to understand the minute detail of what it is. Because the only way to understand minute detail is to have smaller units of sentience working with that minute detail and manipulating what that detail is to try to understand how that detail can be beneficial to the evolution of it. And so our higher selves created smaller versions of them to be able to allow it, or our higher selves, to understand even smaller detail. So if you understand that, if we use the laser electron microscope, we can see the surface of molecules, etc. But we can't see the surface of molecules because we're too big, and so that's why the origin created the source entities, and why the source entities, well, our source entity created or split itself into two and created lots of individualized units of itself, so that they could understand the minute detail of what it is. So in essence, we understand the minute detail and how to manipulate the minute detail and work with other smaller units of sentience in that minute detail, and then we automatically feed that back to our higher selves, which automatically feeds that back to the source, which automatically goes to the origin, because actually we're all the origin.
And so was there, maybe I misunderstood, so was it a matter before it became self-aware, or did I not understand something?
No, that's my level of understanding as well. Not matter. Matter's too dense, just energy. Yeah.
Okay.
Matter is gross physical. Think of it in terms of energy, or finitude, and that energy is part of the finitude. It's, to be honest, the concepts are really difficult to understand, but the way to understand energy is that this energy was significantly higher levels of energy than we would ever be able to detect for thousands of years. but it is energy nevertheless, and it's that energy that became eventually sentient.
And so, from its perspective, that means there's still energy out there, and it just seems to be never ending. Is that the case?
Basically, yes. I mean, I'm starting to understand in the book I'm writing now that the information I got in the other books is just not even that much. It's
Mm.
not even a grain of sand and all of the beaches and all the planets in the physical universe. It's,
Wow.
you know, it's just so small the information, but it's from a human perspective, it's so big. But yeah, I mean, it's the the expansion of sentience is the goal of the origin, and that supports its overall plan of evolutionary progression, which is immense, and everything that is in existence is there to support it. And so eventually, well beyond our comprehension from it in terms of events or time doesn't exist, of course, there will be every aspect of finitude, forget structure, that this is well beyond structure, will be occupied totally by this sentience. But right now it's not. Right now it doesn't. It barely occupies, you know, a bucket of sand in all of the beaches and all of the planets in all the physical universe and beyond. So yeah, it's just a ever expanding sentience that is striving to expand and evolve.
And so, I guess in those probably, not probably, but definitely, we could be sitting here talking about all day. But just so that I figured, I want to ask you one concluding thought, and to see what you've learned about that, and then I'll leave you with some final words. Um, so, us having children generally, is that kind of what the origin then has done to kind of create and then say, okay, I'll instill certain things about myself to you, but the rest you're going to have to go out and explore on your own?
Well, the function of reproduction of the human body has changed over the millennia, and right now it's to the procreation of two halves that creates another half, which is either male or female, which gives the potential for another body to be created later. So the whole business of the human body and other form factors in the physical universe reproducing is giving us the opportunity for smaller aspects of our higher souls to experience the physical and gross physical universe and learn and evolve as a function of it. So having children supports the necessity for more vehicles for other souls to attach themselves to or incarnate into, to allow the possibility of more aspects of sentience to evolve. That's the whole reason behind reproduction, is to create more and more vehicles for souls to experience incarnation and evolution and evolve through.
Well, Guy, is there then something that you want to leave us with in conclusion? Just a thought of something that was profound to you, or just something in general that someone could take away? Because I know most people, and unfortunately, they don't have a lot of attention, or an attention span enough to hold all the information that they receive at all the time. So if they can, anything that they can possibly be left with and remember out of this interview, what would that be?
One of the things that everybody should be able to grasp is that we are all part of the same sentience. We're all one. And if we're all one, then why do we fight against each other? Why do we hurt each other? Why do we try to cheat each other? Why do we try to kill each other? Why don't we just try to evolve together and remove the need to enter into this environment at all, because we can evolve beyond it, provided we work together by realizing that we're all one. And through all of the books and all of the dialogues I've had with other entities, with the source, other source entities, with the origin, and those entities that have been created by source to maintain a multiverse environment, has told me that without any doubt, we are all part of a larger level of sentience. We are all one. And so we should be grateful for that. And we should not be prejudiced in any way. Just because somebody's got a different body type, shape, different color, different sex, different orientation, it doesn't matter. It's just a vehicle that some part of our overall sentience is using to experience, learn, and evolve. So we should be looking after each other and working with each other so that our evolutionary progression is accelerated, and the need for us to come into this harsh and hard environment is reduced as soon as possible. We should love each other.
Well, great. Thanks, Guy. I appreciate it. Well, thank you again for meeting with me today, and I will have all the links to all the books in the description below this video. And yeah, I certainly hope that people take the opportunity to read up in more details about some of the subjects we've covered, because yeah, they might get a snippet, but just even a 1.5 hour long conversation is not going to give the big picture. And I'm pretty sure, as you described, even the books, then eventually it's not going to give you the whole picture if you keep on striving and keep on searching.
That's right. We're all capable of understanding a little bit of the picture, but collectively we might understand a lot more of the picture.
All right. Well, Guy, thanks very much again. Hope to talk to you soon, and we'll catch you later.
Thank you, Adnan. Thank you very much for allowing me to share a little bit of that little bit that I've understood.
You're welcome.